I was going through the seal number and temperature papers on my steering wheel when a man knocked twice on my cab window and said he needed to do a quick cold chain check before I could go to the dock. That was the first thing that felt off. I was in the inbound lane of a large grocery distribution center early for my appointment, with trucks inching forward ahead of me and dock lights reflecting off the wet pavement. It was the kind of place where random instructions were normal enough that you learned not to react too fast. The reefer was humming behind me. The yard was full of safety vests and moving forklifts, and at first, I had no reason to think it meant anything. Still, the timing bothered me. I hadn't even been assigned a door yet, and he was already at my window talking like I'd missed a step everybody else knew. He wore a plain reflective vest, work boots, and a plastic badge on a lanyard that turned when he lifted it. Too fast for me to read much beyond a company logo and a barcode. He said he was doing inbound temperature compliance for perishable loads and needed to check my paperwork before receiving took the trailer. The way he said it sounded practiced. Not aggressive, not awkward, just smooth enough to keep you from thinking too hard for the first few seconds. I cracked the window instead of opening the door and asked what exactly he needed. He said the load information, seal details, and a quick visual to confirm the condition inside. I remember that phrase because it was the first one that didn't sit right. A quick visual. Real cold chain checks usually sound a certain way. Pulp temp, set point, product range, continuous record. He hadn't said any of that. He'd gone straight to wanting a look inside the trailer. Even so, I did what people usually do in places like that. I tried to make it make sense. Maybe he was a third-party contractor. Maybe the warehouse had started using some new audit team, and nobody had told the carriers. I handed him only the top sheet from the folder, the one that showed the appointment and basic commodity category, and kept the rest in my lap. He glanced at it too fast, like he was pretending to check it instead of actually reading it. Then he asked if the seal was still intact and whether I could bring the trailer doors open for a moment so he could confirm there had been no product shift in transit. That was the second thing that felt off. He still hadn't asked for the reefer set point. He still hadn't asked what temperature the load had been running at. He didn't really ask what was on the trailer, and he didn't ask for the actual cold record. He just kept coming back to the one step that would get those doors open before the load officially entered the building. I looked past him then and watched the lane ahead. Another driver was being waved forward by a yard employee with a radio. A receiver in a blue jacket was checking a seal at a different door. Nobody else had some surprise compliance man at their window. The yard still sounded normal, which made him even harder to read. Reverse alarms kept chirping. Pallets thudded somewhere inside the building. The smell around the cab was diesel, wet concrete, and the dry, cold air that spilled from open dock bays. He tapped the edge of my paper with one finger and said receiving had already cleared the check, so there was no reason to wait. I asked which receiver. He answered, inbound side, like that was a real name for a person. Then he nodded toward the back of my trailer and took 2 steps away from the cab before I had agreed to anything, as if the rest was already settled and all I needed to do now was follow him. That was when I got out, not to cooperate, but because I wanted to see what he was really looking at. The trailer doors were 30 feet behind the cab, silver and damp under the yard lights, with the seal still sitting where it should. He was already near them when I came around the side of the trailer. The cold from the reefer unit vibrated through the metal skin. He didn't ask for my bills again. He didn't ask for the temperature unit number or the set point or any of the details somebody in that job would have cared about first. He stood there looking at the seal and the door bars with a kind of focus that felt too narrow to be official. I watched his eyes move over the latch points, not like a man verifying, but like a man estimating. Then he asked if I could break the seal now because he didn't want the trailer sitting warm any longer than necessary. That line almost worked, because it sounded like the kind of thing people say around food freight. But one detail killed it for me. The trailer was still running. The air inside was fine. The only thing he seemed in a hurry about was getting that door open. I said, "No one opens that door until receiving is standing here." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a speech. I just said it and kept one hand on the cold plastic seal. The metal latch was slick with condensation and cold enough to sting through my fingertips. From inside the warehouse, over the hum of the reefer and the clatter of pallet jacks, I could hear somebody calling out door numbers. A real employee in a blue freezer jacket was already walking toward us from the building, probably because my truck had been sitting in the lane too long. The change in the man beside me was small, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. His posture loosened instead of firming up. His face lost that flat work tone. He did not wave the employee over or try to use a name. Instead, he nodded once toward the office and said, "Receiving would confirm the check inside." Then he turned and started walking that way at the same steady pace he'd approached with, like everything was normal, and I was supposed to just follow. The real employee got close enough to ask if I had my door assignment yet, and by the time I looked back, the man in the vest had already passed between two waiting trailers and vanished into the flow of the yard without once trying to explain who he was. The employee looked after him, then back at me, then at the unbroken seal in my hand. I asked if that man worked inbound compliance. He said no before I even finished the sentence. He had never seen him. He also said no one checked trailers like that in the lane, and nobody from receiving would ask a driver to open a perishable load without the door and paperwork already assigned. By then, the man in the vest was almost at the edge of the yard, just another reflective shape moving between trailers. No one was chasing him, no alarm, no dramatic scene. That was the part that stuck with me. The employee radioed a supervisor, and within a few minutes, 2 more people were asking me what he had said, what his badge looked like, whether I had handed over anything more than the top sheet. One of them mentioned that there had been similar approaches at other facilities. Not always theft. Sometimes people were looking for a specific product. Sometimes they just wanted to know what was on which trailer before it entered the system. Then I got a dock number, backed into the door, and watched the real receiver break the seal in front of me. The unloading itself was completely ordinary, which almost made the whole thing worse. The freight was fine. The temperatures were fine. The receiver checked the trailer the way receivers actually do, with the right questions, the right forms, and the kind of boring attention that tells you this is how it's really done. They opened the doors, counted, scanned, and moved on. Nothing had happened, and that was what bothered me. A guy with a cheap badge, a vest from any hardware store, and the right tone of voice had gotten within seconds of standing inside my trailer before the load had even made it into the building. There was no force to it at all, no threat, just routine, the awkwardness of saying no in a place where people are always telling you what to do, and that little fear every driver has of being the one who holds things up because they questioned the wrong person. By the time I finished the paperwork and pulled away from the dock, I realized the dangerous part wasn't really what he claimed to be. It was how little he had to say before the system almost opened up for him. Since then, I don't pay much attention to the badge or the vest first. I watch the eyes. Real staff usually look at the office, the paperwork, the dock number, something in the process. People who want something else look at the trailer first, then try to make the rest sound official. Most of the time it means nothing. But every now and then I still pause and think about how ordinary that morning looked, right up until I realized he was never there for the check. He just wanted those doors open before the right people got there. Before we move on, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I always like checking those comments. And if you're enjoying the video so far, feel free to leave a like. So, let's see what the next story is about. The first sign something was wrong was so small I almost talked myself out of it. I was a few hours into an overnight run with a sealed reefer full of palletized grocery freight, heading east on a quiet stretch of highway after leaving the terminal without a single issue. The paperwork was clean, the trailer temp was steady, and the load had been sealed and checked like always. Then, on a long curve, I felt the trailer answer me just a fraction late. Not a sway, not a pull, nothing dramatic enough to scare a four-wheeler. Just a slight delay in the way the weight came back behind me. The kind of thing you feel through the seat and the wheel before you can put words to it. I checked both mirrors right away. The trailer looked straight. The lights were fine. Nothing on the dash said there was a problem. But once I'd felt it, I couldn't stop feeling it. I told myself what any driver tells himself at that hour. It was probably the road. That stretch had old dips in it, and some nights a reefer felt different depending on how the pavement hit the tandems. I checked the gauges again, then the mirrors again, then eased back up to speed. For a few miles it felt normal enough that I almost let it go. Then it happened again on another wide curve. The same little hesitation, like the weight in the trailer needed one extra beat to settle. A little later, I made a simple lane change around a slower vehicle, and when I came back over the trailer, took just a touch too long to fall in clean behind me. That was when fatigue stopped sounding like a good answer. I was awake. I knew this trailer. I knew the difference between a rough road and something in the truck answering back the wrong way. I started watching the rear of the trailer harder in the mirror, but there was nothing there to help me. The reflective tape looked normal. The door hardware looked normal. The seal hung exactly where it should. I kept watching it on straight stretches anyway, almost hoping I'd catch some tiny clue on the outside that would make the whole thing ordinary again. I didn't. Whatever it was stayed in the truck and out of the mirrors. I didn't want to stop on a dark shoulder for a maybe, but I'd felt it enough times by then that not checking felt worse than losing 10 minutes. I took the next wide pull-off I could find and went back with my flashlight, already expecting at least one bad answer. The shoulder was wide enough to stand on, but not wide enough to feel safe. Trucks kept blowing past in the dark with that heavy rushing sound that made my jacket move against my back. I went to the rear doors and put the light on the hardware first. The seal was intact. The number matched. The handles were fully seated. The latch points were closed the way they should be. I checked it twice because I didn't like what it meant. There was no broken strip, no bent metal, no rushed reseal, no simple answer waiting under the beam. From the outside, the trailer was exactly what it was supposed to be. Cold, locked, and sealed. I stood there with the flashlight in one hand and traffic pushing wind across the shoulder and felt my stomach drop for real the first time. If the doors were right, then whatever I'd been feeling had no business being in there. I went back to the cab, telling myself I'd get to a lit truck stop, open it properly, and settle it one way or the other. As soon as I got moving again, the trailer gave me a stronger version of what I'd been feeling the whole time. Not right away, and not violently. That was part of what made it worse. I merged back into the lane, let the truck build speed, and for a minute it felt almost manageable. Then I came into a narrowed construction zone and eased off with the engine brake. A muted shift moved through the whole unit. Not a crash, not a slam, just a deep, heavy movement I felt in the seat, the wheel, and the floor under my boots. Then there was a second touch from the trailer, faint as it was. Not freight settling this time, but something smaller, later, and wrong. My hands tightened on the wheel before I even realized it. I remember saying out loud, to nobody, if the doors are right, then something in there is moving. The reefer kept humming behind me like it had all night. I kept my speed down and aimed for the first big truck stop ahead because I wanted light, people, and open space before I opened those doors. When I finally got under the white lights of the truck stop lot, I parked well away from the pumps and went straight to the rear doors. The seal was still perfect. That almost stopped me from cutting it. Almost. I broke it, pulled the handle, and opened one door just enough to throw my flashlight beam inside. Cold air rolled out first, carrying that smell of wet cardboard and produce and clean refrigeration that should have meant everything was under control. It was cold enough to sting, not true freezer cold, but the kind that would wear a man down fast. Nothing looked stolen. Nothing looked ripped apart. The pallets were still there in long, tight rows, but between two of them, farther in than any forklift should have left it, was a narrow gap no manifest could explain. Just enough room for a person to turn sideways. The cartons on both sides were pressed inward, where knees or shoulders had leaned on them for support. One box near the floor had a dirty handprint on the white cardboard. I climbed in one step and stopped. The air stung inside my nose. Condensation made the floor slick under my boots. The plastic wrap on the nearest pallet felt hard and glossy under my fingers. Then the reefer cycled off. The silence hit first. After hours of engine noise and that refrigeration hum, that one dead second inside the trailer felt bigger than the whole highway. In it, I heard one light contact from deeper in the load. Not a box falling, not a bar slipping. Just one small touch, like knuckles or a shoe brushing cardboard and then going still. I backed out so fast I hit the metal edge of the door with my shoulder. I didn't shout into the trailer. I didn't crawl farther in. I went straight toward the store and brought 2 employees back with me. Then the manager called the police. By the time we opened both doors all the way and got more light inside, the space was still there but empty. No person, no dramatic trail out. Just cold pallets, crushed cardboard where somebody had made room, and a cheap plastic water bottle flattened near the base of the rear row, like it had been stepped on in the dark and missed during a fast exit. The officers checked the trailer, then the lot, then asked me the kind of questions that sound unreal when you're answering them at 4 in the morning. Had I stopped anywhere unscheduled? Had I heard anything at any stop earlier that night? Had I opened the doors at any point? The employees searched around the parking area with flashlights. Nobody found anyone. That was the part that stayed with me more than if they had. There was no one caught halfway through a bad plan. No fight, no confession, nothing to pin the shape of it to. By the time I reached the receiver, the freight itself was mostly fine. A few cartons were crushed, where the gap had been forced between pallets, but there was no major loss, no ruined load, no dramatic insurance problem waiting at the dock. The paperwork still had to be written, statements still had to be taken, and the trailer still had to be checked all the way through. But the real damage wasn't on the report. It was knowing that for part of that drive, while I watched gauges and mirrors and trusted a sealed door, something alive had been riding back there with the freight. If somebody got in, it had to be later, not back at the terminal, but at some short stop I'd already stopped counting as important. I finished that day the way drivers finish bad days, by taking the next instruction, because there wasn't anything else to do. But one part of my routine changed, and never changed back. Now I don't just check the doors. I wait for the reefer to cycle off, because in that second of silence, you can tell whether the trailer is carrying freight or something that knows how to keep quiet. The first strange thing was hearing my first name from the ground below my door while I was still sitting in the cab with my coffee. I was parked in a warehouse staging yard outside Dayton a little after 1 in the morning, waiting for my delivery window to open, doing what I always did when I got somewhere too early. The yard was full enough to feel normal. Reefer units were humming, a forklift was backing somewhere near the bays, and the office lights were still on behind the glass door. Then this man stepped up beside my truck, looked up at me like he had caught me in the middle of a routine, and said, "You always use this half hour the same way." He said it so calmly that for a second I thought I had met him before and forgotten. I looked at him harder and knew I had not. He was ordinary in the most uncomfortable way. Dark jacket, nothing marked on it. Clean face, hands relaxed. No rush in him at all. People came up to trucks at night for all kinds of reasons. They wanted money, a cigarette, directions, help with a trailer light. This man did not ask for anything. He just stood in the yellow spill from the yard lamp and watched me with the patience of someone waiting for me to catch up. I told myself he had probably seen my company badge when I checked in earlier, or heard somebody say my name in the office. That made sense. What did not make sense was the way he kept looking past me into the cab, at my logbook, my cup in the holder, the tablet on the passenger seat, like all of it was familiar already. I tried to keep it polite because that is what you do in public places when you do not want trouble. I asked if we knew each other. He gave a small smile and said no, not exactly, but he had noticed I liked this yard because it let early drivers sit close to the office without getting blocked in. Then he nodded toward the painted line under my steer tire and said I parked in that same row every time I got here before too. He said it lightly, almost like a compliment about being organized, but that was the first detail that put a weight in my stomach. The row was not special to anyone else. It was just where I parked when I wanted a fast check-in and enough room to pull straight out. I had never said that to anybody. I looked past him toward the office windows, thinking maybe one of the clerks had been watching me for months and told someone as a joke. Everything still looked normal. A driver in a hoodie crossed the yard toward the vending machines. A trailer door slammed shut. The place still felt too public for anything real to be happening. Then I noticed the notebook in his hand. It was small enough to fit in one palm, dark cover, pages bent at the corner from being opened too many times. He was holding it low near his thigh, not hiding it, not offering it either. When his thumb shifted, I saw narrow lines of handwriting, neat and compact, like entries, not random scribbles. He said drivers never noticed how visible they became when they ran the same lanes long enough. He said most of them thought privacy meant not talking too much on the radio anymore, or not posting where they were eating, but routine gave away more than people realized. I told him he was talking like he knew me, and he answered with another one of those flat little observations. You buy coffee before you check in, even when the office is already taking paperwork. That one got me because it was true, and because it was stupidly specific. Not a big secret, not some dramatic thing, just a small habit I had built into my body after too many cold nights and too many tight appointments. I should have shut the door then. I know that now. But that was the detail that kept me there. It was too exact, too small, too useless for a guess. I needed to know how he knew it. I asked him directly if he had been watching me. He did not flinch. He just looked toward the loaded trailers lined up by the dock and said, "People watched patterns, not people." Then he gave me another piece, and this time it stretched beyond that yard. He said I had spent 40 minutes outside a closed tire shop near Indianapolis on a rain night 3 weeks earlier, and before that, I had used the service lane behind a food warehouse in Richmond to wait out an early arrival. Both were true. Neither was something anyone should have had ready in their mouth at 1 a.m. I felt the cold air coming through the cracked door much more sharply after that. The coffee in my hand had gone stale and bitter. I looked around again, harder this time, but the yard had turned strange in a way I still remember. Not empty, not quiet, just sealed off. Forklift beeps came and went. Reefer fans shivered under the trailers. The office clerk was bent over a computer 10 yards away. All that normal movement made it worse because none of it touched what was happening at my door. I told him to leave. He nodded like I had said something reasonable, but he did not move. Instead, he opened the notebook a little more and rested one finger between the pages as if he were marking my place. Then he looked at the coffee in my hand and said, very calmly, "You are about to finish that. Crush the cup a little in your hand, wait for the line at the desk to clear, then carry your paperwork in with your right hand because you hate setting it on wet counters." The words hit me harder than if he had shouted. I had not done any of it yet, but every part of it was already there in me, ready to happen. My fingers were already tightening around the cup without me meaning to. I looked toward the office and saw exactly what he had seen. One driver still at the window, one clerk sorting papers, a short wait before my turn. I climbed down from the cab without planning to. My boot hit the metal step, then the wet pavement. The air smelled like brake dust, diesel, and cold concrete. Somewhere close by, a dock plate dropped with a hard iron bang that seemed to go through my ribs. I was standing close enough now to see the pressure mark of his thumb on the paper and hear the soft, dry scratch as the page edge moved against his hand. He held the notebook steady and said, almost kindly, "People lock doors. They leave routines open." That was the moment it became something else. Not a weird conversation, not some creep bluffing for attention, but a trap that had already been closing for a long time while I kept calling it normal. I heard my own voice before I decided to use it. I asked what he had written about me, loud enough for the men by the vending machines to turn. The stranger's face changed. Not much, just enough. The calm did not vanish, but it tightened. He closed the notebook halfway and said I was overreacting, that nothing in there was illegal, that anyone with patience could build a schedule out of public life. I did not care anymore. I took one step back, enough to get space between us, and called toward the office. The clerk looked up. A yard security man came out from the side door, zipping his jacket as he walked. The stranger lowered the notebook against his leg, as if that small movement could erase what he had just done. The whole thing stayed quiet in the worst way. No fight, no shove, no shouting match. Just fluorescent light from the office, wet asphalt under our boots, and the understanding that he had known what I was about to do before I did it. Security took him inside with the clerk and another supervisor who had come out from the office. They asked me for my name, unit number, load number, simple things I answered automatically while my hands stayed colder than they should have been. One of them told me, in that careful voice people use when they do not want to say too much too early, that they had heard about a man asking drivers odd questions at other yards. Nothing direct enough before then, he said, nothing that stuck. I gave a short statement. I watched the office door through the glass while they kept him in there. He never looked angry. That bothered me more than if he had. He looked like someone interrupted in the middle of work. By the time my appointment window opened, the eastern edge of the yard had started turning gray. The dock took me late. Then the bills took longer. Then the road pulled me forward again, because work does not stop, just because your skin still feels wrong. I finished the run, but the shape of the job changed under me after that night. Every small thing I had built to make the work easier started looking like a trail. Which row I chose, how long I sat before check-in, which places I trusted when I was early, which nights I bought coffee because I knew I would be backing into a door half asleep. I changed the small things first. I stopped parking in the same row, stopped sitting with the door cracked open, stopped using the same half hour the same way, started moving even when moving made no sense. It did not help. The notebook was only proof of something bigger. The problem was that my body had been living the same week over and over, and I had mistaken that for being responsible. 2 nights later, I pulled into a rest area just long enough to wash my face and look at the map. There were cars in the lot, a bus idling near the far curb, and a man near the vending machines writing something with his head down on a small, dark pad balanced in one hand. He might have been making a grocery list. He might have been writing down a plate number. I stayed there with my hands on the wheel until the cup in my fist began to fold, exactly the way he had said it would. That's all for today. Thanks for listening all the way through. If you enjoyed the stories, leave a comment before you go and let me know what your favorite part was. Don't forget to subscribe, and a quick like really helps too. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.